Long ago, in the quiet swirl of galaxies far beyond our sky, the stars whispered of a child who would bring balance to the Force, a promise carved not in stone, but in sand, wind, and dreams. This is not the tale of lightsabers and wars, not tonight. This is the gentle story behind the storm, the quiet heart that beat within one of the most feared names in the galaxy. Before he was Vader, he was Anakin. Before the mask, there were dreams. Before the darkness, there was a boy, barefoot in the dust of Tatooine, who looked to the stars with wonder in his eyes and asked what lay beyond them. The galaxy called him the Chosen One, but to his mother, he was simply her son. Tonight, we don't rush through battles or echo the clash of fate. We slow down, drift through the moments often left unspoken, the silent thoughts, the sleepless nights, the fragile hopes. This story begins not with war, but with warmth. A desert breeze brushing against the face of a child who fixed broken things and helped strangers smile. As you close your eyes and rest beneath your own sky, we'll follow Anakin's journey from that first spark of innocence, through love and fear, through fall and redemption. We'll walk with him through Jedi halls lit by moonlight, across clone trooper barracks filled with unspoken worry, and deep into the shadows where choices became chains. You'll hear the hum of lightsabers far away, but they will never disturb your peace. Instead, listen to the hush of his memories, laughter in the hangar bays, whispered hopes to Padme, and the way his footsteps slowed when he felt torn between what was expected and what was needed. You'll float gently beside him, through starfields, dreams, and regrets, as his heart battles between duty and devotion, strength and surrender. This is not the Vader you've heard in stories of fear. This is Anakin, lonely, gifted, misunderstood, and longing to save what he loved, even if it meant losing himself. His story is not about falling, but about feeling. And perhaps, like the Force itself, it is all connected. Love, loss, peace, pain. Every sound tonight will be soft. The wind through Coruscant towers, the waves on Naboo's shore, the breath behind the helmet. This tale will not wake you. It will keep you safe. And when you drift to sleep, you'll carry a piece of his light into your dreams. Because deep down, Anakin never stopped searching for home. Not a place, but a moment. A moment when someone looked at him, without fear or prophecy, and simply said, "You're enough." So breathe in, let the stars settle. The galaxy is wide, but for now, we'll move slowly. This is a story for the heart, not the ears. A story of a boy, a shadow, a father, a light. This is the story of Anakin Skywalker, and tonight, it's told only for you. In the far reaches of the Outer Rim, on a planet forgotten by time and untouched by mercy, there lived a boy made of dust and light. His name was Anakin Skywalker, and long before anyone called him the Chosen One, he was just a child with bright eyes and sand-cracked hands, growing up beneath twin suns. Tatooine was no place for dreams. The sand there wasn't just under your feet, it was in your food, in your clothes, in your bones. It coated the walls, clung to your eyelashes, and whispered through the alleys like a ghost. But Anakin dreamed anyway. He dreamed while fixing junked-out droids and half-dead pod racers in the back alleys of Mos Espa. He dreamed while carrying scraps through boiling streets for a junk dealer named Watto, who barked and cursed in Hudaza. And most of all, he dreamed while looking up into those endless sun-swept skies, where ships came and went like shooting stars, full of travelers who didn't have numbers instead of names. You see, Anakin was born into chains. He and his mother Shmi were property bought and sold like old speeder parts. Their home was a small room in the slave quarters, a space made smaller by silence, by waiting, by the way time passed slower when your life wasn't your own. But even in that cage of heat and debt and dirt floors, Shmi always told her son he was meant for something more. And Anakin believed her, not out of pride, but because he had to. Because if he didn't believe that, then the stars were lying. He was unusually gifted, even for a child. No one knew how or why. He could fix machines no one else could, feel things before they happened, and had reflexes far beyond anything Tatooine's racers had ever seen. He'd never even been trained, but the Force was already blooming inside him like desert rain. At night, while his mother braided what little hair she had left, or lit the small lamp that buzzed over their beds, Anakin would talk about building things. Not to escape, but to create. He built a working translator droid from spare parts. He built gadgets that could fly, hover, race, and sing. And one day, quietly, in the heat of the back room, he began building something else, a pod racer. Faster than any Mos Espa had ever seen. Everyone said it was impossible for a human to race one. The reflexes were too fast, the control too fine. But Anakin had already done what most men on Tatooine never could. He hoped. Every evening after his chores, after Watto had waddled away and the streets had quieted to the hush of distant cantinas, Anakin would lie back on the sand just outside the slave quarters. His mother watched him sometimes, hands behind his head, eyes watching the stars slowly appear. He didn't speak, and neither did she. Because sometimes the only thing bigger than hope is silence, and they had both learned how to live with it. Then one day everything changed. A ship crash-landed in Mos Espa. Not a traitor, not a bounty hunter, a Jedi. Qui-Gon Jinn, tall, patient, carrying a light that even the heat of Tatooine couldn't dim. With him were Queen Amidala in disguise and a young apprentice named Obi-Wan. They needed parts for their ship, a hyperdrive, but what they found instead was Anakin. Qui-Gon noticed him instantly, not just for his skills, but something deeper, something the Jedi hadn't seen in a long time. When he tested Anakin's blood, the results were impossible, a midi-chlorian count higher than even Master Yoda. Qui-Gon didn't just believe in destiny, he trusted the living force. And in this child, born without a father, shaped by hardship, Qui-Gon saw the threads of a prophecy long whispered through Jedi halls. A chosen one who would bring balance to the Force. But Anakin didn't know any of that. All he knew was that someone finally looked at him, not as a slave, not as a tool, but as someone who mattered, someone who could choose. Still, nothing was simple on Tatooine. They couldn't buy his freedom. Watto wouldn't take Republic credits. But Qui-Gon, clever and calm, made a bet. One pod race. Anakin's pod racer, his own creation. If he won, they'd get the hyperdrive, and Anakin would be free. If not, he'd remain in chains. The night before the race, the sky was restless. Winds swept across the dunes, and the stars blinked behind a veil of dust. Anakin sat in his workshop, adjusting the power couplings, tuning the engine's whine, trying not to tremble. He was only 9, but in that moment, he carried the weight of futures not yet written. His mother kissed his forehead and said softly, "Don't look back." She knew what might come. She also knew what had to. In the morning, crowds filled the grand arena. Pod racers roared like beasts. The announcers screamed. And in the heart of it all, a boy climbed into a machine no other child had ever dared to ride. When the flag dropped, he flew. He flew like the Force was guiding every inch of the course, past Sebulba's tricks, past wrecks and crashes and walls of heat. The engines screamed, the crowd roared, and then silence. He crossed the finish line, against all odds, against every rule of Tatooine's cruel game. And just like that, he was free. The chains fell, not physically, not completely, but enough to step forward, enough to follow Qui-Gon, enough to look his mother in the eyes, tears clinging to both their lashes, and say goodbye. He didn't want to leave her, but he did, because something deep inside him, something old, something full of fire and light, told him he had to. As the ship lifted off from the hot sands of Mos Espa, Anakin stood at the viewport, watching the only home he'd ever known grow smaller and smaller beneath him. His mother was there, still waving, a dot of love in an ocean of dust. He placed a hand on the glass and whispered to the stars. It was the end of one life, and the quiet, trembling beginning of another. He had no idea what waited for him. No idea that the stars he loved so deeply would one day burn with betrayal. That the freedom he'd won with speed would one day be buried in silence. But that didn't matter yet. Because right now, he was just a boy. A boy with open hands, open heart, and open sky. A boy who left the sand for the stars. And somewhere deep in the Force, a whisper stirred. The chosen one has begun. The stars that once looked so far away now hung around Anakin like familiar lights in the ceiling of a dream. Coruscant, the shining capital of the galaxy, stretched beneath him in endless waves of towers and traffic. Ships moved like shooting stars, guided by purpose. And yet, Anakin floated. He was no longer a slave, no longer a child of the sand. He was something else now, something he barely understood. A Padawan, a learner, a Jedi in training. But in truth, he was still just a boy far from home, with a heart full of questions and a silence he didn't know how to fill. The Jedi Temple was vast, serene, sacred, a place where even the echoes were patient. There were gardens without wind, fountains that whispered, and chambers so ancient the walls seemed to hum with memory. To many, it was peace. To Anakin, it was quiet. Too quiet. He had come from heat and dust, laughter and clutter, danger and love. Here everything was clean, everything was calm. And yet, he could still hear his mother's voice in the back of his mind, could still feel the tug of the past, like sand stuck in his robes. Master Yoda watched him with knowing eyes, small, green, and ancient, while the Jedi Council debated what to do. Anakin was too old, too emotional, too attached. Jedi were meant to let go of fear, of anger, of love. But Anakin held on to memories, held on to people, held on to things that made him feel alive. The Jedi saw this as danger, but Qui-Gon Jinn saw it as potential. Unfortunately, Qui-Gon's time was short. During a mission to Naboo, he would fall cut down by the Sith Lord Darth Maul in battle. Anakin had barely begun to understand the Force before the man who believed in him was gone. And suddenly, his journey forward rested in the hands of Qui-Gon's apprentice, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan was still young himself, disciplined, focused, dutiful. And yet, somewhere beneath all that Jedi training was a man who never asked for this responsibility. A man now bound to train a boy prophesied to reshape the galaxy. Theirs was not a friendship at first. It was awkward, quiet. A bond built not on ease, but necessity. Obi-Wan taught, Anakin listened, and sometimes Anakin resisted. There were lessons in lightsaber forms, in meditation, in the history of the Order. But the real lessons weren't in the books. They were in the cracks, in the questions Anakin asked when no one else dared, in the emotions he couldn't control, in the way he looked out the temple windows like he was still searching for something that wasn't there. He missed his mother. He never said it aloud in the temple, but he carried her with him in every step. Jedi weren't supposed to, but Anakin wasn't like the others. He hadn't been raised from birth in the Order. He hadn't learned to let go before learning how to love. And so, as the years passed, he grew stronger, but also more divided. His connection to the Force was unlike anything Obi-Wan had seen. He could lift starfighters with his mind, see danger before it came, react faster than any Padawan his age. But his emotions burned bright, unpredictable. The Council watched closely, some with concern, some with fear. But Yoda, ever quiet, ever wise, simply watched. Because the Force did not always reveal its path early. In these formative years, Anakin traveled with Obi-Wan across the galaxy to peacekeeping missions, relief efforts, and dangerous border disputes. The war hadn't yet begun, but the galaxy was already showing signs of fracture. The Republic was strained. Corruption seeped through its Senate halls, and in the shadows, a darkness was growing slow and patient. Meanwhile, Anakin's experiences shaped him. On the frozen world of Ilum, he constructed his lightsaber, a crystal humming blue in his hands, like a whisper of fate. On remote Outer Rim settlements, he healed the sick, saved stranded refugees, and questioned why the Jedi served a system that often looked the other way. He made friends few but strong. He learned to trust his instincts, to rely on Obi-Wan even when they disagreed. And slowly, very slowly, the two began to form something closer to a brotherhood than a hierarchy. Obi-Wan didn't always understand Anakin, but he saw the boy's heart. And Anakin, though he often felt misunderstood, respected Obi-Wan more than he would admit. Together, they became a formidable team. But in the quiet, when the stars dimmed, Anakin's dreams still stirred. Sometimes he'd wake in the temple, heart racing, memories of his mother pulling him back to Tatooine. Other nights, he would wander the silent halls and stare at the stars, wondering if the Jedi path would ever feel like home. There were days he felt proud. Victories won, lives saved, bonds formed. He was becoming a Jedi. He was learning to control his power. But there were also cracks forming small at first. Jealousy when other Padawans received praise. Frustration when he was told to be patient. A sense that he was meant for more, even if no one else could see it. And through it all, the prophecy lingered. The Chosen One, a title he hadn't asked for, but one that followed him like a second shadow. And then she returned. On a mission tied to a rising separatist threat, Anakin was reunited with Padme Amidala, no longer the Queen of Naboo, but a senator, graceful, strong, and unshakably kind. She had once been a distant memory. Now, she was a presence, real, radiant, and human. She didn't see a Jedi. She saw the boy from Tatooine, the one who had once given her a necklace carved by hand, the one who had once asked if she was an angel. Anakin tried to hide how he felt. Jedi were forbidden to love. But the truth clung to his heart like a secret sunrise. Every glance lingered. Every word carried weight. And slowly, something ancient stirred in him, something the Jedi taught him to avoid. But the Force had never denied: attachment. As we leave this chapter behind, Anakin's life is still mostly unwritten. He walks the halls of the temple with purpose, learns with Obi-Wan, questions with quiet fire. But the lines are beginning to blur. The boy from Tatooine is growing not just in strength but in conflict. The Force flows through him like a storm just beyond the horizon, and somewhere in that storm, love waits, fear waits, and destiny watches, patient as the stars. The galaxy was no longer at peace. What began as political unrest had erupted into fire, a storm of separations and sieges, of battle droids and fallen systems. The Clone Wars had begun. Across the stars, planets trembled under metallic boots, and the Jedi, once guardians of peace, became something else entirely. Generals, commanders, warriors. Among them was Anakin Skywalker. No longer just a Padawan, not quite a master, but already a legend whispered across war fronts like a name wrapped in fire. The boy from Tatooine had grown into a man of the battlefield, and with him marched clones who called him General Skywalker, men born for war who followed him not out of programming but out of trust. Because unlike many Jedi, Anakin didn't treat them like numbers. He called them by name. He fought alongside them, bled with them, grieved for them, and they followed him into fire, willingly. War changed him, but not all at once. It came in pieces, small moments, and sudden choices. He flew starfighters like they were extensions of his own limbs. He carved through droid armies with precision and rage. He broke sieges, saved planets, defied orders when they didn't feel right. His missions were risky, his victories miraculous. And yet, behind the headlines and heroics, something quieter unfolded. Anakin married Padme Amidala in secret, hidden from the Jedi, hidden from the world. In a quiet garden on Naboo, far from the noise of the war, they whispered their vows with trembling hands. No fanfare, just love. Desperate, beautiful, forbidden, but theirs. He was a husband now, a warrior, a Jedi, and somehow all of it lived inside him like a storm he couldn't name. The war only deepened the divide. Days bled into missions, nights into debriefings, and in between, stolen moments with Padme holograms, encrypted messages, the rare visit under shadows. Their love survived, but it was never still, always moving, always hiding, and though she brought peace to his heart, the galaxy only offered chaos. Wintide your Oshito. Anakin's bond with Obi-Wan deepened too. No longer just master and apprentice, they were brothers in arms. Through countless battles, through victories and mistakes, they learned to trust one another in silence. Obi-Wan's calm grounded Anakin's fire, and Anakin's instinct saved Obi-Wan more than once. They teased, argued, protected, respected. Two halves of a war they never asked for. But even that bond would be tested. You see, something else had entered Anakin's life, someone who would leave a permanent mark. Her name was Ahsoka Tano, a young Padawan assigned to him without warning, full of energy, sass, and spirit. At first he bristled. He didn't want a student. He barely understood how to be a Jedi himself. But Ahsoka challenged him, mirrored his recklessness, pushed his patience, and in time, won his trust. They became a team, a family. She was like a younger sister, a student and a mirror. And in training her, Anakin became something the Jedi had always doubted he could be, a teacher. But war doesn't wait for relationships. It burns through everything. Missions stacked endlessly, each one darker than the last. Anakin walked through fields of ash, saved children from burning villages, led clone troopers into battles he knew they wouldn't all survive. Every victory cost something, and though he hid it behind charm and strength, the toll etched itself into his soul. The darkness he buried after Tatooine stirred, He began to question the Council, their politics, their distance, why they sent Jedi to fight wars but refused to form attachments, why peace was spoken of more than it was practiced. And in these cracks of doubt, someone else began to speak. Chancellor Palpatine, a kind face, a fatherly voice, a man who told Anakin what others wouldn't, that he was powerful, special, destined, that the Jedi feared his strength, that they would never understand him like Palpatine did. At first, Anakin dismissed it, but slowly, over months, over missions, the words began to take root, especially when the Council withheld trust, especially when Padme's safety became uncertain, especially when dreams, dark, cold, vivid, began to haunt his sleep. Dreams of Padme dying, crying out, and him, powerless. The boy who once lifted pod racers was now terrified of losing the only person who made him feel human. Then came the fracture. Ahsoka, accused of treason, framed, hunted, forced to run, and the Council turned their back. Anakin fought to prove her innocence. He bled for it, argued for it, pleaded, and in the end, he succeeded. The truth came out, but the damage was done. Ahsoka walked away from the Order, from Anakin, from everything, and in her absence, a piece of Anakin broke, quietly, permanently, because she was family, and the Jedi, the ones who preached loyalty, abandoned her. The war raged on. Planets fell, worlds burned, and Anakin smiled less, laughed less, trusted less. The hero the galaxy adored was beginning to fade behind the armor. The war had dragged on for years. Planets that once sparkled with peace now flickered with the glow of fire and wreckage. Starships that had carried relief now carried soldiers. And Anakin Skywalker, once the boy with wonder in his eyes, now carried something heavier than a lightsaber, the quiet weight of dread. Because his dreams had returned. Darker now, sharper, more vivid. Padme was crying, reaching, dying, and every time he awoke, her name echoed in the silence like a promise he couldn't break. The boy who wanted to save everyone now feared he might lose the only one who truly knew him. But how do you stop something you don't understand? The Jedi gave no answers. Meditation only quieted his breath, not his heart. And the Council, increasingly distrustful of him, offered cold advice, not comfort. They sensed his struggle, but offered discipline. They saw his strength, but feared its source. And when the moment came to reward his victories, they held back. They granted him a seat on the Council, an unprecedented gesture for someone so young, but not the title of master. Anakin was stunned, hurt, angry. No Jedi had ever been on the Council without earning that rank. Was it tradition, caution, or something deeper, a refusal to trust the one they called chosen? And behind the scenes, Palpatine spoke softly. He told Anakin the Council was using him, that they saw him as a tool, not a man, that they feared his power, but needed his success. And then Palpatine said something else, something Anakin could never forget. A tale of an old Sith legend, Darth Plagueis the Wise, who had learned to cheat death, to create life, to save those he loved from dying. At first, Anakin resisted. He knew the Jedi taught that such power was dangerous, unnatural, but the words echoed in his dreams again and again. Save her, save her, save her. And then came the final thread. The Council, wary of Palpatine's power, asked Anakin to do the unthinkable, spy on him, betray the man who had mentored him, praised him, trusted him when others didn't. It felt wrong, not Jedi-like, and yet he said yes, hoping it might help, hoping he could do the right thing while protecting the person he loved most. But lines were blurring, and Anakin was walking them blindfolded. Padme noticed the change. His hands were colder, his eyes more distant. She asked if he was all right. He lied, gently, smiled, softly. But the weight in his chest grew heavier with each passing hour. The war was nearing its end. General Grievous had fallen, the Separatists were splintering, and hope flickered on the horizon. But inside Anakin, hope was not growing. It was dying. And in the shadows, a choice was waiting. Palpatine revealed the truth. He was the Sith Lord, the orchestrator of the Clone Wars, the manipulator of both sides, and he offered Anakin the one thing no Jedi ever could, the power to stop death, not in fables, not in meditation, but in reality. Anakin was horrified, and yet he didn't strike. He warned Mace Windu. He did what a Jedi should, and Windu, fierce and unyielding, confronted the Chancellor. Lightsabers clashed. The dark side filled the room like smoke. Palpatine pleaded for his life, claimed weakness, and Anakin watched as Mace raised his blade to end it. Watched as the voice in his head screamed louder than the teachings in his heart. And in one terrible moment, Anakin made a choice. He stopped Windu, not to save Palpatine, but to save Padme, or so he told himself. But choices have consequences. Palpatine struck, Windu fell, and the room, once golden with the light of the Coruscant sunset, turned cold. Anakin dropped to his knees, whispered a vow. "I will do whatever you ask. Just help me save her." And in that instant, Anakin Skywalker died. What rose was something else. The Jedi Temple was quiet that evening. The sky over Coruscant glowed a soft amber, streaked with the fading warmth of sunset. But inside the halls of stone and wisdom, the Force trembled. Somewhere deep in the archives, a youngling practiced his stances. A knight knelt in silent meditation, and high above, the Grand Masters conferred in worried tones. None of them knew it would be their last twilight. None of them could feel what was already rising. From the Chancellor's office, Anakin stepped forward in silence, his boots heavy, his breath slow, and behind him marched death. Not a monster, not a fleet, but clones. Hundreds of them, soldiers born in obedience, now turned by a single command, Order 66. Across the galaxy, Jedi fell. In forests, in deserts, in swamps, in cities. Their friends, the clones they trained with, ate with, saved, turned on them in an instant. And back at the temple, the betrayal ran even deeper. Because Anakin Skywalker, once the boy who dreamed of stars, led the attack. No longer the hero with no fear. He was Vader now. But not yet in mask or name. He walked through the temple gates like a shadow, lightsaber drawn, no hesitation, no mercy. The same halls that once echoed with lessons and laughter, now filled with screams and static. No one was spared, not masters, not Padawans, not even the smallest of the youngling's children who looked up at him and asked, "Master Skywalker, what do we do?" And he said nothing. The light was leaving his eyes. But even in the fire, something inside him still trembled. Because after the temple burned, after the bodies fell, Anakin stood alone and wept. Not with tears, but with silence, with breathing that shook, with hands that would not still. And across the city, Padme felt it. Though she didn't know what, she felt the cold. She watched the temple smoke from her balcony and held her stomach, the child within her, a quiet secret, her husband, a darker one. Anakin returned to her, his eyes strange, his voice low. He said that Jedi had betrayed the Republic, that he was doing what had to be done, that everything he was doing was for her, to protect her, to save her. She touched his face and saw something there she didn't recognize. She said his name over and over, trying to reach him, to hold him, to stop the storm before it drowned them both. But the boy she loved was slipping away. Obi-Wan came to her soon after. He was broken, his voice tight. He asked where Anakin had gone, and though she tried to protect him, tried to believe there was still time, Obi-Wan saw it in her eyes. He knew. And so, a new journey began. While the galaxy screamed, while the clones hunted what Jedi remained, Obi-Wan boarded Padme's ship and flew to the one place he knew Anakin would go, Mustafar, the lava world. A planet of fire and ash, a fitting end for what had once been so bright. Anakin was there, sent by Sidious, no longer Palpatine, but fully Sith, to end the Separatist leaders and secure the final piece of the Empire's rise. And he did so, ruthlessly, efficiently, every last one. His blade was red now, his eyes nearly the same. Padme arrived first. She ran to him, desperate, hopeful, broken. She said his name again and again, said there was still time, that they could leave, raise their child in peace, far from war, far from power. But Anakin was gone. He spoke only of control, of overthrowing Sidious, of creating a new empire, one where he could protect her, rule the galaxy, never fear death again. He believed what he said, believed it was love. But love doesn't come with chains. And when he saw Obi-Wan step from the ship, his voice turned to thunder. "You brought him here to kill me." The ground cracked. The fire screamed. And Anakin ignited his blade. The duel that followed was not just a battle, it was a collapse. Years of brotherhood, trust, and pain erupted into light and fury. They fought across catwalks, bridges, platforms drowning in magma, each move full of memory, each strike full of grief. Obi-Wan begged him to stop, said, "You were the chosen one," said, "You were my brother." But Anakin only raged, called him a traitor, a liar, a thief of destiny. And in the final moment, Obi-Wan leapt to higher ground. He warned Anakin not to try it. But Anakin, proud and furious, did. And in one clean move, it ended. His legs, his arm, gone. He fell to the embankment, crawling, screaming. Fire surrounded him, and Obi-Wan couldn't finish it. He walked away, crying, leaving the man he raised to fate. And the lava took him, burned him, left only a shell. It was quiet after the fire. The lava no longer screamed. The blades were gone. The thunder of betrayal had passed. Only the smoke remained, and the slow rasp of breath. Anakin Skywalker lay in silence, broken near the river of flame, his skin charred, his limbs severed, his voice lost. The wind on Mustafar blew hot, but it carried no comfort, only ash and memory. He should have died there. Perhaps he wanted to, but fate had other plans. Or maybe the Force did. Far above, a sleek black shuttle cut through the sky. It moved with purpose. No panic, no sorrow, just design. And when it landed beside the body, out stepped the man who had planned it all. Darth Sidious. He did not look upon Anakin with pity. He saw potential, the twisted remains of a prophecy finally in his grasp. His apprentice shattered, scorched, blind to what he had lost, but still breathing. And that was enough. With a flick of his hand, Sidious summoned the medics. They carried what remained of the Chosen One aboard the shuttle, wrapped not in cloth or reverence, but in metal and containment. The boy from Tatooine was gone. The rebirth began on Coruscant, deep beneath the Imperial Medical Facility, in sterile halls where light had no warmth and machines whispered without pause. There was no prayer, no ceremony, only process. The surgeons worked quickly. Droids monitored every beat, every drip, every silent scream. First came the lungs, then the spine, then the armor. A black casing, seamless and cold, built not for comfort, but for survival. A prison of technology to keep him breathing, not healing, not whole, just alive. The helmet was last. It descended like a tombstone. And when it sealed, the world changed. The first breath echoed through the chamber, mechanical, hollow, inhuman. The voice that followed was no longer Anakin's. It was deep, filtered, empty. A whisper of pain dressed as command. He rose slowly from the table, metal joints whining, and Sidious smiled. "There is no Anakin," he said softly. "You are Darth Vader." The darkness was complete, but somewhere, in some corner of the Force, a flicker still trembled, because across the galaxy, Padme was dying, her body weak, her breath shallow. The medical droids found no wounds, no poison, no physical cause, but her heart was broken. She had given everything to love someone who was now lost. And though she brought twins into the world, two small, crying echoes of a future, she did not stay. Her last words were simple. "There's still good in him." And then she was gone. Obi-Wan watched it all in silence. Yoda stood still. Bail Organa lowered his head. They had won the war. The Jedi were gone. The Republic was dead. And in the ashes, a family was broken before it could even begin. The twins were separated. One taken to Alderaan, the other to Tatooine. Back to the sand, back to the beginning. And far above it all, in the cold throne room of the new galactic empire, stood Vader. He stared out the viewport at the stars, not with awe, not with hope, but with absence. His hands no longer touched. His voice no longer smiled. His dreams, once so full of wonder, now wandered aimlessly through corridors of regret. Sidious gave him commands, planets to subjugate, rebels to crush. But in the hours between battle and breath, Vader was alone, utterly. No laughter, no warmth, just duty. The temple he had once walked in childhood burned. The brothers he once trained beside dead. The wife he once vowed to protect buried. And the face beneath the mask, hidden, always. He never removed it, not in the light, not even in solitude, because the man underneath was not the Sith Lord they feared. He was still hurting, still dreaming. Sometimes he walked the halls of his Star Destroyer and caught glimpses, visions, not from memory, but something deeper. A child laughing, a woman's hand brushing against his cheek, a whisper, like wind in the desert, "You're enough." He tried to silence them, but the Force is not a weapon. It's a mirror. And Vader couldn't stop looking. Time passed. Years, then decades. The galaxy turned beneath the iron hand of the Empire. Planets that once danced in freedom now whispered in fear. Star systems lit by ardent music now bowed beneath banners of black and crimson. And at the center of it all moved a shadow. Darth Vader, not as a king, nor as a ruler, but as an enforcer. A phantom wrapped in metal and memory, drifting from system to system like a myth come to life. Some said he couldn't be killed. Others said he wasn't alive to begin with. To the outer rim, he was a ghost. To the inner circle, a weapon. And to those who once called themselves Jedi, he was the end. They hunted them. Sidious called it the Inquisition. Vader led it. Jedi survivors were rare, scattered like leaves after a storm. But every once in a while, the Force would stir. A child would lift a stone without touching it. A traveler would move faster than light. And Vader would know. He never rushed. He never shouted. He simply appeared. And when he did, silence followed, his cape brushing against cold stone, the red glow of his blade casting long shadows, the hum of breath steady, mechanical, eternal. He never spoke more than needed, never questioned, never paused. And when it was over, he left nothing but ash. But even in those moments when the galaxy trembled at his presence, something inside him still flickered. A hesitation, small and silent. A memory too stubborn to die. Because sometimes they looked like him. Young, hopeful, afraid. And sometimes they asked the same thing. Why are you doing this? Vader never answered, not out loud. But deep beneath the armor, where the pain still whispered, he remembered. He remembered a time when he asked that question, and no one answered him either. He built a fortress, not in a city, not in celebration, but on Mustafar, the planet of his fall. He returned there not because it brought him peace, but because it didn't. Because the screams in the rock, the fire in the wind, the ghosts in the lava, they matched his soul. And so, atop obsidian cliffs, Vader raised a tower, not for glory, but for penance, a place of power and of pain. There were chambers no one entered, hallways that echoed with nothing but breath, walls filled with Sith relics, Jedi holocrons, and artifacts from a past he would never touch again. Here, he meditated, not with serenity, but with stillness. He reached through the Force, searching for something. Padme. Her name never left him. Not in speech, but in thought, in dreams, in visions. He tried to find her, tried to speak to her. He begged the Force to show her face, just once. But all he ever saw was fire. And every time he opened his eyes, he was still alone. The galaxy feared him. But some tried to understand him. A few high-ranking Imperials tried to earn his trust. None succeeded. Most stayed quiet in his presence. A few tried to challenge him intellectually, politically, even militarily. They didn't last long. Vader didn't argue. He didn't threaten. He simply acted. One flick of the wrist, one silent step, one final breath. And then, calm. Because Vader didn't need to raise his voice. The silence was louder than any scream. There were missions, dozens, hundreds. Few were recorded in full. Some were bloodless, others unspeakable. But the one constant was Vader's presence. Wherever he walked, change followed. Entire rebellions crumbled at the whisper of his name. A planet's king once surrendered, before the fleet even arrived. A bounty hunter once fled into hyperspace just because he saw the silhouette of a cape. And yet, none of it brought him peace. Because true power isn't quiet. It roars. And in all those years, Vader never roared. He only breathed. He crossed paths with those who stirred something in him. A pilot with fire in his heart. A woman who reminded him of Padme. A droid that looked at him without fear. a Jedi who refused to run. Each time, something in him stirred. A twitch of the hand, a flicker in the Force, a memory rising like smoke. He buried it, pushed it deeper, told himself he was free. But the truth? Vader was still a prisoner, not of the Jedi, not of the Empire, but of himself. Vader's fortress stood like a wound carved into the lava, but even surrounded by fire, he remained still. There were no windows, no music, no color, just the hum of power systems, the soft hiss of sealed doors, and the ever-present rhythm of his breath. He spent hours, sometimes days, in isolation, meditating, searching, listening. But the Force rarely answered him with kindness. Instead, it echoed. With the screams of Mustafar, with the silence of Padme's death, with the laughter of a child he never knew. He had buried Anakin Skywalker, but the Force had not. And so, in the quiet hours when no one watched, Vader tried to forget. He sparred with droids hundreds at a time. He crushed entire strongholds without drawing his blade. He walked into temples once sacred to Jedi and burned them stone by stone. But after every conquest, after every mission, he returned to the same place, alone, not victorious. Just unchanged, because power, he had learned, doesn't fill the space left behind by love. It only makes the emptiness quieter. The Inquisitors served beneath him and once Jedi, now twisted into hunters. They feared him. He didn't speak often. He didn't correct them when they bowed too low. He only stepped forward when one failed. And when they did, there were no second chances. One by one, they fell out of line. One by one, they disappeared. But there were moments rare and strange when Vader would pause before ending them. A flicker of something old in his stare. Like he recognized the pain, the confusion, the hunger for identity. Because once, he was them. And perhaps, in those moments, he remembered what it was like to be used. To believe you were doing good, while drowning in darkness. Then came the whispers. A rebel movement, a spark in the galaxy. It started small supply raids, intelligence leaks, but it grew. It spread like wildfire in dry grass. And when word reached Vader's ears that someone had stolen plans from the Empire, he moved. Not because it was protocol, but because the thief was bold, fearless, reckless, familiar. He watched the tapes. A boy, not more than 19, blonde, brave, wearing white against a black sky, piloting like no one had since, Anakin Skywalker. The resemblance stung. He asked no one for names. He didn't need to. The Force told him. This boy was his son. It wasn't possible. Padme had died. He saw her, felt it. But the Force doesn't lie. And Vader, for the first time in decades, felt something he had long buried: hope. It came with fear, not of the boy, but of what the boy represented. A future, a chance, a mirror. And so began the slow unraveling. He didn't act at once. He watched, tracked, listened. He stood silently in briefings while others discussed rebel cells and star charts. He tuned them out, because all he could hear was the heartbeat of the Force shifting. The galaxy wasn't silent anymore. It whispered a name: Luke. And Vader whispered it back. There were battles, explosions, close calls. But it wasn't until Bespin that father met son. In a city floating among the clouds, Vader set a trap, not to kill, but to reveal. He faced Luke across steel beams and windswept walkways. The boy fought bravely, better than Vader expected, stronger than most, driven. Vader didn't just strike to win. He tested, measured, felt the rhythm of his movements, the anger, the fear, the heart. And when the moment came, the truth slipped like thunder. I am your father. The words were not shouted. They were whispered, but they shook the galaxy. Luke screamed, not in pain, but disbelief. And Vader felt the distance between them. He offered his hand. Join me. Let's rule together. Let's fix the galaxy. Let me not be alone. But Luke fell, literally. He let go rather than join the darkness. And as he disappeared into the clouds, Vader stood still, the metal giant. But inside, a father, failing again. After Bespin, the silence grew heavier. Vader returned to his duties, but the missions felt dull. He walked through fire and chaos like a ghost. Sidious noticed. He warned Vader not to waver. He reminded him of Padme, of loss, of betrayal. But Vader no longer listened with full loyalty, because the voice of the Emperor now competed with another. A quiet one, young, brave, his son. In his chambers, Vader built, not weapons, but questions. He searched every record, every trace, every whisper of Padme's final days. He asked droids things he never dared before. He looked into birth registries, medical logs, Naboo archives. He found no direct answers, but the absence of data told him enough. She had given birth, and the Emperor had lied. Vader did not rage. He did not confront. He simply waited, because the day would come. A final test, a final choice. And when it did, it would not be Sidious who decided the fate of the galaxy. It would be him, not as a Sith, not as a machine, but as something in between. The stars above Endor twinkled quietly. But beneath their calm light, a battle was brewing, not just in the sky, not just on the forest moon, but deep inside a man who had long forgotten what it felt like to choose. Darth Vader stood aboard the Death Star, not triumphant, not restless, just still. He looked out the window, watching the rebel fleet take shape in the distance. Ships assembled in courage, fighters buzzing like insects around a monster of metal. To others, it looked like a trap. To Vader, it looked like a question. Would they come? Would he? Luke Skywalker was out there, somewhere in that chaos, flying toward destiny. And Vader could feel him, not as an enemy, but as a pulse in the Force, warm, stubborn, and familiar. It had been years since Vader felt the Force whisper in comfort. Now, when it moved around Luke, it felt almost forgiving, like the galaxy hadn't given up yet, like there was still a chance to rewrite everything that had been shattered. He stood beside the Emperor in silence. Sidious smiled, that cruel, crooked smile that twisted joy into fear. The throne room was cold, not physically, but spiritually. Tall, dark columns rose like the ribs of some ancient beast, and at the center sat evil, small, wrinkled, smiling. Vader didn't look at him. He didn't need to, because the moment the elevator opened, he knew. Luke had arrived. He stepped forward in chains, but not in defeat. His posture was steady, his eyes calm, his breathing unshaken. Vader hadn't seen such stillness since Obi-Wan. The sight stirred something in him, not rage, not pity, but pride. My father is truly dead, Luke said. And Vader didn't respond, because he didn't know if it was true. Not anymore. They brought him before the Emperor. Luke stood still. The Emperor chuckled, and Vader watched. Sidious spoke of power, of destiny, of striking down one's enemies. His words were sharp, practiced, filled with poison. Luke resisted. Vader felt the storm building between them, the tension not of war, but of decision. Because Luke wasn't here to fight. He was here to reach. And Vader, deep within his armor, felt himself leaning toward the sound of his son's voice. Not physically, but spiritually. It had been so long since someone had looked at him and not seen a monster. The battle outside raged on. Flashes of red and green. Explosions blooming like distant flowers. The Death Star shook with impact. But in the throne room, there was only silence and temptation. Sidious pushed. He placed Luke's lightsaber in reach. He urged him to strike, to kill, to become. And Vader waited. Because he knew what came next. He had lived this moment before. Only then, he had chosen wrong. Luke ignited the blade. He swung, and Vader moved a block. The clash echoed across the room, not just metal on metal, but ideology on ideology. Father and son, darkness and light. And something in between. They fought. Not with fury, but with feeling. Vader pressed forward, heavy, relentless. Luke danced back, swift, defensive. It wasn't like Bespin. This time, Luke was stronger. But Vader was tired. He didn't say it. He didn't show it. But each swing felt heavier than the last. Not from pain, but from meaning. Because each strike brought him closer to the truth. He didn't want to win. He wanted to understand. Who was this boy? Why wouldn't he fight back? Why did he still believe? Vader had killed hope before, crushed it, burned it. But now it stared back at him, with his own eyes. Luke faltered. Vader surged forward. The fight pushed toward the shadows. The Emperor laughed in the background, drunk on chaos, desperate for destruction. And then, Vader found the truth. Luke snapped. He roared in anger. He struck like a storm. Vader stumbled back, overwhelmed. For the first time, afraid. Not for himself, but for Luke. Because in that moment, he saw himself. Young, wild, falling. Luke's blade came down, again, and again, until Vader collapsed. One final blow severing his mechanical hand. The red blade hissed to silence, and Vader waited. But Luke stopped. He looked at his father, at the sparking wires, at the exposed metal, at what he could become. And he threw the saber away. I am a Jedi, like my father before me. The words settled like ash. And Vader, lying broken, felt warmth. Not in his limbs, but in his soul. His son had won. Not the battle, but the war inside. The Emperor rose, furious. He unleashed his power, lightning drawn from darkness, arcing through the air like claws. It struck Luke. He screamed, fell, cried out, "Father!" And in that moment, everything stopped. Vader rose, slowly, silently. He looked at the Emperor, then at Luke, then at the lightning. And he chose, not as Darth Vader, but as Anakin Skywalker. He lifted the Emperor, carried him, screaming, across the room, and cast him into the abyss. A flash of light, a scream swallowed by darkness, and silence. Vader fell. Smoke rose from his armor. His breath sputtered. Luke crawled to him, cradled him, held him. And Anakin looked up at his son not through a mask, but with his own eyes. "Let me look on you, with my own eyes." The helmet came off. And the monster was a man, scarred, aged, but at peace. He smiled. "Tell your sister, you were right." And then, stillness. Not empty, but whole. The Death Star crumbled. Its heart, once pulsing with power and darkness, began to tear itself apart. Luke carried his father's body through the chaos, through collapsing hallways, through smoke and silence, through the wreckage of war. There was no time left. But he moved slowly, deliberately. Not just because Vader was heavy, but because letting go would be even heavier. This was not the Sith Lord he'd fought on Bespin, not the killer of Jedi, not the servant of evil. This was his father, broken, freed, and for the first time, human. As the shuttle rose into the sky, the stars seemed to shimmer in rhythm with Luke's breathing. The forest moon of Endor waited below, untouched by the violence above. On its surface, the Ewoks celebrated. Their songs, soft and strange, echoed through the trees. Fires were lit. Dancers twirled. Laughter rippled like wind through leaves. The Empire had fallen. Stormtroopers scattered. The Emperor was gone. But while the galaxy sang, Luke stood apart. He had one final duty. In a quiet clearing, away from the joy and the noise, he built a pyre. Wood, stone, stillness. He laid the armor down gently, piece by piece. Chestplate, mask, cape. Each part once a symbol of fear, now a symbol of closure. He did not cry, not yet. He just stood and remembered. The fire glowed orange, casting tall shadows into the night. Luke watched the flames rise, watched the smoke curl upward toward the stars. There were no speeches, no farewells, just the crackling of wood and the whisper of the wind. But in the Force, something stirred, a warmth, a presence, not a ghost, but a peace. Anakin Skywalker had returned, not as a warrior, not as a Jedi, but as a father. Leia found Luke by the edge of the celebration. She didn't need to ask where he had been. She felt it, through the Force, through the silence in his eyes. He told her the truth, about Vader, about Anakin, about the man who had fallen and the man who had risen again. She didn't say much, but she took his hand, because family doesn't need explanations, only presence. That night, while fireworks danced across the sky, Luke looked into the forest. And there, just for a moment, he saw them. Yoda, Obi-Wan, and Anakin, smiling, not in robes of battle, but in robes of light. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence said enough. Luke smiled back, not with pride, not with sorrow, but with understanding. The past had finally found its rest. The galaxy changed after Endor, slowly, carefully. The rebellion began to shape into something new. A republic, not perfect, not without challenge, but with hope, a hope built not on weapons, but on memory, on what had been lost and what had been saved. Luke traveled, not as a soldier, but as a seeker. He returned to old temples, walked through Jedi ruins, listened to whispers carried by the wind. He wasn't searching for power. He was searching for meaning, for balance. He meditated in caves, studied forgotten texts, taught no one, not yet. because the Force wasn't ready to be loud again. It needed time to be quiet, to heal, just like him. In time, stories began to spread, not just of rebels and pilots, but of a masked knight who had turned from darkness, a monster who chose mercy. Children whispered his tale at night, wondering if the stars remembered his sacrifice. And they did, because the stars remember everything. In a small village far from Coruscant, a child looked up at the sky. He had never seen the Empire, never heard the Emperor's voice. But he had heard of Vader, and more importantly, of Anakin, the man who changed, the man who chose. And in his quiet heart, the child believed something simple, that even the worst among us can return to the light. Long after the flames of Endor faded and the echoes of battle fell silent, Anakin Skywalker lived on, not in body, not in armor, but in memory, in myth, in the gentle moments between stars. He became a story, passed quietly from one generation to the next, not always in full, not always in truth, but always with wonder. Children on distant moons heard of a fallen Jedi who once flew faster than the wind and loved with all his heart, who burned and broke and returned in the end. Elders spoke of balance restored, of the Force shifting like a tide that had finally reached its shore. Across the galaxy, some remembered him as Darth Vader, the hand of cruelty, the shadow in the corridor. But others, especially those who felt the Force, remembered the man behind the mask. They remembered Anakin, the chosen one, the boy born without a father, the slave who dreamed beyond the stars. Some whispered that he had become the Force itself, a quiet presence watching over all who dared to walk the path of light. On Ahch-To, in the ruins of the first Jedi Temple, the stones seemed to hum with the weight of his legacy, as if even the earth remembered his choices. On Naboo, Padme's tomb was still visited by those who knew love could be stronger than fate. On Tatooine, where his journey began, the sun still set over the sand with the same warmth that once lit his childhood smile. The people of the galaxy never agreed on his story. Some feared it, others honored it, but they all carried it. For stories like his are not forgotten. They slip into dreams. They hide in lullabies. They shape the choices of those not yet born. Luke Skywalker would speak little of his father in public, but in quiet conversations, he would sometimes describe a look, a glance Vader gave him right before the end, that held more love than words ever could. Leia Organa rarely spoke of him at all. Her wounds ran deeper. But even she, in time, came to understand the man behind the terror. She knew that pain does not erase love, and redemption, though rare, is never impossible. Years later, when Luke began to train new students, he often told them not of Vader's fall, but of Anakin's heart. He told them of a boy who risked everything for love, of a man who lost his way but never lost his soul. He taught them that the Force was not about control or strength or destiny. It was about connection, compassion, the courage to return even after you've wandered too far. Some listened, others did not, but all felt the weight of the story. Anakin's legacy was not perfect. It was not clean, but it was real. And real stories, even the messy ones, carry the most meaning. He was a caution, a warning, a mirror, a light. In time, Jedi texts were rewritten to include his tale, not as a prophecy, but as a person, not as a hero or villain, but as both. Because the Force itself is not one side or the other. It is the balance, the stillness between, the breath that connects all things. And in that breath, Anakin remained. In every child who chooses peace over anger. In every warrior who pauses before striking. In every parent who risks everything for their child. He was not erased. He was remembered, quietly, softly, deeply. On some nights, Force sensitives still hear a presence in the stars. Faint, kind, familiar. A warmth in the silence, a hum in the air. And when they close their eyes, sometimes, just sometimes, they feel the hand of a Jedi reaching back through time, reminding them that even the darkest paths can lead home, that no one is ever truly lost, that light, once found, never fully fades, and that the name Anakin Skywalker, whispered gently into the Force, still carries the hope of a galaxy reborn. And so the story of Anakin Skywalker faded not into silence, but into something softer, something quieter than legend, into the hush of the galaxy's breath, the pause between stars, the stillness that lingers after a life well told. The Force, forever flowing, cradled his memory like a stream curling around a smooth stone, never forgetting, never rushing, just holding. Jedi after him would wonder where the Chosen One's path truly ended, and the wisest among them would say it never did, for Anakin was not a chapter that closed, but a thread woven into everything that came after. From the twin suns of Tatooine to the snowfields of Hoth, to the farthest outer rim moons still dreaming of peace, his legacy lingered not in statues or titles, but in the quiet choices of those who still believed in redemption. Luke continued to walk a path shaped by his father's love and his mistakes, not worshiping the man nor blaming him, but simply understanding him. Leia carried both fire and forgiveness, knowing that the blood of a tyrant and the heart of a hero could exist in the same soul. And even in later years, when darkness returned to the galaxy in new forms and new faces, the echo of Anakin's journey whispered through it all, not as prophecy fulfilled, but as a reminder that no fall is final, and no person too far gone to turn back toward the light. Some Jedi built temples again. Some simply meditated in silence beneath trees and stars, remembering that the Force lives not in codes, but in kindness. Grogu, little and wise, would tilt his head as the Force shimmered gently around him, as if listening to an ancient voice that still hummed in the quiet. Rey, standing alone at the edge of the desert, once felt a warmth rise from the ground beneath her feet, a memory she could not name but felt as familiar as breath, as if the very sand had once carried the weight of a Skywalker's steps. And perhaps it had, for the Force is timeless, and so is the love we leave behind. It's in every choice to show mercy, every whisper of peace in a time of war, every parent's hand shielding their child, every student who asks not for power, but for understanding. And in all these things, Anakin lives on, not as a figure of fear, not as a statue of glory, but as something better, a man who failed, who hurt, who rose, who loved, who returned. His legacy does not belong to the Jedi or the Sith alone. It belongs to all who carry light within them, even when they have wandered through shadow. For if Anakin Skywalker could fall so far and still find his way home, then so can anyone. And that is the gift he left behind. Not power, not prophecy, not perfection, but the truth that even the most broken soul can become whole again. So when you close your eyes tonight and drift into that star-filled dream, know that somewhere in the great galaxy, among the floating moons and ancient temples, beneath the glow of forgotten worlds, the spirit of Anakin walks in peace, not armored, not haunted, just still, just free. The stars remember him. The Force remembers him. And so do we. Sleep well, dreamer. The darkness has passed. The story is complete. The light remains. After death, there is no throne, no command, no saber to lift or mask to wear. Only silence, deep and endless, wrapped in the hum of the Force itself. And in that silence, Anakin Skywalker finally breathes without pain. His spirit, no longer torn between darkness and duty, drifts through the vast cosmic field where time has no meaning and sorrow has no weight. He is no longer the trembling boy beneath the Tatooine suns, nor the desperate general of the Clone Wars, nor the armored shadow called Vader. He is only presence now, still, aware, connected. The Force embraces him not as a savior or a monster, but as a soul that returned. There are no chains here, no anger, no war, only echoes, soft, harmonic echoes, carrying the stories of every life he touched. He feels Luke's love and Leia's resilience like ripples through water. He hears the laughter of Padme, warm and fleeting, like a breeze passing through tall Naboo grass. The voices of Obi-Wan and Yoda are no longer lessons or commands, but quiet companions, walking beside him in the spirit realm, where Jedi of old sit in peaceful contemplation beneath trees made of starlight and rivers that shimmer with memory. Anakin walks gently now, not bound by flesh or guilt. Sometimes he visits the edges of dreams, appearing as a flicker in a child's sleep, a warm hand guiding a frightened Padawan, or a whisper in the heart of someone close to falling. He does not speak often, and when he does, it is not with words but with feeling, a hush, a warmth, a pause that changes the path ahead. Some Jedi, like Rey, feel his presence and do not know his name, only that something within the Force believes in them, walks with them, holds them steady when they shake. On rare occasions, Anakin stands beneath stars that once lit the battlefield and closes his spirit eyes, remembering, not with pain, but with stillness, not with shame, but with understanding. He knows now what he didn't before, that love must be free, that fear must be faced, that power means nothing without peace. In this realm, there is no need to fix what is past. There is only the soft unfolding of healing, like flowers blooming in a night that has waited too long for light. The Force does not punish. It does not forget. It only receives. And in receiving Anakin, it weaves him back into the fabric of all things, into the rustle of leaves on a Jedi world, into the hush before a storm, into the moment a student chooses to forgive instead of strike. He is part of that now, not as a ghost chained to regret, but as a guide made from light. In this place, Jedi of old tell their stories, tales not of battle, but of harmony, of kindness, of failure turned to wisdom. Anakin listens. Sometimes he speaks too. He speaks of a woman who believed in him, even when he could not believe in himself. He speaks of a son who laid down his weapon, not for victory, but for hope. He speaks of a brotherhood shattered and still, in time, mended. He speaks of masks and how removing one can feel like removing the sky, and how necessary that still is. The spirits nod. They understand. They do not judge. They simply listen as the Force listens to all things. Every now and then, a new soul arrives, lost, weary, looking for rest. And Anakin, now whole, steps forward to meet them. He says nothing of his name. He offers no legacy. He simply offers presence, a quiet comfort that tells the new spirit, you are home now. There are no trials left, no fear, only peace, only the endless rhythm of the Force. In the far reaches of this realm, Padme waits, not always visible, not always separate, but always near. For love, once true, finds its way again, even across the threshold of death. They meet not with fanfare, but with familiarity, a reunion that feels like breath returning after long absence. They speak with touch, with glance, with the space between them filled with everything unsaid and everything already known. Together, they watch the galaxy unfold. Together, they forgive the time they lost. And together, they remain, not as rulers of anything, but as keepers of quiet, as holders of light. In the physical galaxy, stars burn and wars fade. Monuments rise and fall. Names are remembered, misremembered, or forgotten. But in the Force, nothing is lost. And Anakin Skywalker, once broken, now whole, now luminous, flows gently in the current of eternity, not to change the world again, but to keep it warm, to keep it steady, to remind the living that peace is not a prize, but a path. And in this truth, in this dream of light, he rests. And still he lingers, not as a ghost bound to memory, not as an echo of fear, but as a soft vibration in the current of the Force, a frequency tuned to healing, to patience, to love rediscovered after ruin. In the quiet corners of galaxies far from battlefields, where children dream of distant stars and Jedi no longer carry sabers, but seeds, the story of Anakin Skywalker is not told with fire or fury, but with hush and wonder, as if the wind itself carries it across time. Sometimes a youngling meditating under the shade of an Athorian tree will feel a presence kneel beside them, unseen but safe, warm like sunlight filtered through cloud. Sometimes a traveler lost in the void of hyperspace will feel steadied by a sudden calm, a touchless reassurance that says, "You are not alone." And sometimes, in the moments just before sleep, a fading master, old and weary, will close their eyes and see him, not as Vader, not as chosen one, not as prophecy, but simply as a man who fell and got back up. For that is the truest shape of Anakin's spirit, not power, not perfection, but return. Return to self, return to hope, return to light. In the place beyond places where Qui-Gon Jinn first learned to remain after death, where Yoda and Obi-Wan sit in luminous stillness, Anakin walks beside them now, not ahead, not behind, but beside. There is no hierarchy in peace, only harmony. They do not speak often, these spirits, because words are unnecessary when presence speaks louder. They drift through dreams, through Force visions, through the memory of temples long lost and rebuilt again. They cradle the fears of the living not by answering them, but by simply being there. An invisible hand on the shoulder, a pause in anger, a whisper at the edge of rage that says, "You can choose." Anakin understands choice more deeply now than ever. He knows that destiny is not a path laid out, but a garden tended slowly. His footsteps leave no trail, and yet their impression is felt everywhere that someone chooses forgiveness over vengeance. He smiles, quietly, in the fabric of the Force when Rey steadies her breath. He listens, invisibly, when Ahsoka Tano stands on quiet cliffs and remembers a master who both failed her and loved her completely. Their bond was never severed by war. It was simply waiting to heal. And now it does, slowly, in silence. Through her too, his story flows. Through all of them. For the Chosen One was never meant to be a weapon. He was meant to remind us that even in the darkest moment, a flicker of good remains. That flicker has spread, not as fire, but as glow. A calm light, the kind that drifts across lakes at night or rests gently in the palm of a child learning their first Force lift. He does not return to shape events. He does not interfere. His time of action is long past. Now, he simply is. And in his being, there is peace. On the outer rim, monks who do not call themselves Jedi sit in circles, eyes closed, hands resting open, whispering prayers to the breath of the Force. They do not say Anakin. They do not need to. They feel him there, a warmth without name, a light without form. And in their chant, in the stillness of their rhythm, he smiles. He does not need to be remembered in statues or recorded in scrolls. His redemption was not for glory. It was for love, for Luke, for Padme, for himself. The galaxy will forget names. It will blur faces, but it will never lose the rhythm of return, that quiet turning from fear toward grace. That, now, is what he represents. In this final rest, he is more alive than he ever was in war. He walks under skies that shimmer with the spirits of stars, where no sun burns too bright and no shadow stretches too far. He drifts beside Padme, not in speech, but in the eternal comfort of presence. Their silence says everything. They are whole. They are home. And in their home, the galaxy turns, slowly, softly, forever. The Force breathes. The dream deepens. The chosen one sleeps, not to escape, but to remain, in peace without end, in light without limit, in a galaxy that, because of him, still dares to hope. The name Skywalker did not end with Anakin, nor did it linger only as a ghost in Jedi temples or a footnote in histories carved into broken stone. No, it became something quieter, deeper, something passed on not by blood alone, but by choices, by courage, by acts of compassion repeated in soft succession through generations who would never meet the original bearer of that name, but still carry its essence in their hearts. It lived in Luke, whose every step was shaped by the silhouette of his father's fall and the quiet roar of his redemption. A son who never knew his father as a man, but still chose to believe there was something good inside the shadow, who trained not to destroy, but to save, who stood before darkness unarmed and unafraid, because he understood that the light doesn't shout, it whispers. Luke's journey wasn't just a sequel to his father's, it was a quiet rebellion against despair, a proof that ancestry does not dictate destiny, and that one can be born a Vader and still become a symbol of hope. In his temple, surrounded by children of the Force, he tried to build something gentler, a generation of Jedi who didn't win wars, but prevented them, who listened more than they struck, who understood that the Force is not about control, but harmony. And even when that temple fell, even when his nephew was lost, and the embers of his teachings scattered into the stars, the legacy endured. For Leia Organa, the Skywalker name was not one she often used, but it pulsed quietly in her blood, guiding her choices as she fought for justice, as she loved fiercely, as she led not from a throne, but from the battlefield, the council chamber, the home. She was Skywalker in spirit, tenacious, bright, empathetic to the broken. And though she rarely wielded a lightsaber, she carried the Force in her like a quiet river, deep and steady, felt most clearly in the way she could see people not as they appeared, but as they could become. In her final years, she passed this quiet strength on to Rey, not as a weapon to wield, but as a presence to hold, as a truth that even in the loneliest places, family can be found and legacy can be chosen. Ben Solo, her son, bore the name of another, but carried the war of the Skywalker bloodline in every fiber of his being. Torn between light and dark, seduced by the shadow, but haunted by the light, he was the living echo of Anakin's tragedy, the repetition of a wound not yet healed. And yet, he too turned. In the end, just as his grandfather once had, he laid down power, gave up control, and reached not for domination, but for love. His final act was not a strike, but a sacrifice. And through that, the pattern was broken. Through that, the Skywalker name, once defined by fall, became instead the symbol of return, of redemption, of grace. And then came Rey, an orphan of nowhere, a scavenger without name, who held no bloodline, no temple, no training, but still felt the Force moving in her like breath, who rose again and again, not because she was destined, but because she chose to. She saw the darkness. She faced it. She carried Palpatine's blood, but did not let it carry her. Instead, she looked to those who had walked before, to Luke, to Leia, to Anakin, not as idols, but as reminders. That pain does not have to define you. That family is not just inheritance, but choice. And in the quiet sand of Tatooine, under the same suns that once watched a lonely boy dream of stars, she chose the name Skywalker, not to erase her past, but to rewrite it, to plant something new in the soil of old wounds. The galaxy would continue as it always does, full of wars and peace, of old empires and new rebellions. But somewhere in the fabric of it all, the legacy of the Skywalkers pulsed gently, not as royalty, not as warriors, but as reminders that in every person there is the power to return to the light. That you are not what you were. That your future is not your father's shadow, nor your master's mistakes, but your own soft spark waiting to grow. And so the name lives on, not in monuments or medals, but in the choices of those who feel the Force rise within them, like morning light. A farmer who lays down his blaster, a leader who listens instead of commands, a child who stands between two fighting friends and says, "There's another way." In all of these, the Skywalker story continues. And though Anakin himself may sleep now in peace, his presence echoes not in fear, but in love, in the silence between battles, in the hand that helps up, in the eyes of someone who has every reason to hate, but instead chooses to forgive. And so, like the stars themselves, the Skywalkers fade not with a scream, but with a shimmer, ever present, never overbearing, watching quietly from the folds of the galaxy they once reshaped, their memory settling not in thrones or titles, but in the hands of the forgotten, the hopeful, the brave who wake each morning and choose kindness over cruelty, who feel the Force not as a weapon, but as a wind, brushing softly across their path to remind them that they are part of something bigger, something older than pain, something softer than destiny. The name Skywalker now drifts like pollen through time, unclaimed, unattached to politics or power, belonging instead to those who carry its spirit in their breath, their steps, their quiet refusals to give in to fear. It echoes in young initiates lighting candles in the ruins of old temples, not to resurrect what was, but to guide what will be. It lingers in the pulse of distant worlds where Jedi no longer wear robes, but repair droids, plant trees, teach children how to listen to the Force inside their own hearts. It lives in sabers built not from aggression, but from balance, blue, green, and gold, flickering like dreams across the shadow of a history once shaped by loss. Even the Force itself seems to hum more gently now, as if relieved that the great wound it once held in Anakin's name has healed, not with perfection, but with patience. And in this slow healing, stories take root of Luke's lonely island and quiet final stand, of Leia's courage to lead in love, of Ben's final offering and Rey's choice to carry light where none was given. Each tale is incomplete, imperfect, beautifully unfinished, but each is enough. And from these pieces, the myth of Skywalker becomes something more human than heroic, more whispered than shouted. It becomes a lullaby sung to Force-sensitive children who do not yet know what Jedi means, only that the light inside them is sacred. It becomes a lesson passed from elder to student, not to fight like Anakin, or lead like Leia, or search like Luke, but to feel like them, to believe like them, to fall and rise and fall again, not with shame, but with grace. Even planets that once burned under the heel of empire now see fields of new growth, forests blooming where ash once reigned, laughter where silence held sway. And somewhere in all of it, in the chirp of droids and the hum of ships and the quiet of night, the Skywalker name rustles like a breeze, smiling but never speaking, watching but never weighing, present without pressure. For that is what true legacy is. Not a burden, but a blessing. Not a name to be worn like armor, but a memory that comforts, a light that follows, a hand on the shoulder when no one is there. The Skywalker line ends, and yet it does not. Because it was never just blood. It was never just saber skill, or midichlorian count, or prophecy. It was heart. And wherever there is heart, wherever someone chooses mercy over wrath, empathy over power, healing over harm, the Skywalkers live on. In the dreams of quiet rebels, in the peace of balanced Jedi, in the smile of someone who dares to believe that even the fallen can be saved. And perhaps in the final turning of the galaxy spiral, when all wars have stilled and only stories remain, the last tale told by the last fireside will not be of conquest or darkness, but of one name passed in silence, from soul to soul. Skywalker. A name not of greatness, but of grace. A name that teaches us not to be perfect, but to return. Always return. There are places in the galaxy where time folds gently inward, where gravity drifts like mist, and where the Force sings more clearly than any voice. A music felt in the bones, in the breath, in the stillness before sleep. These are the spaces where dreams and visions bloom, not bound to planets or politics or even people, but born of the Force itself, reaching outward like tendrils of light through the fog of the unknown. Jedi called them nexuses, vergences, echo points, spots in space where boundaries between mind and mystery dissolve, where sleeping travelers wake to visions they cannot explain, where children sketch stars they've never seen and whisper names they've never heard. And in these strange, soft places, the legacy of the Force continues, not as fire, but as a dream. In the ancient world of Mortis, for example, where the son, the daughter, and the father once balanced the cosmic tide of light and dark, visions still ripple outward like whispers across water. No one has found Mortis since, and perhaps they never will again. But sometimes, when a pilot drifts too far from a trade route and lets their mind wander, they feel the strange chill of it, the awe, the possibility, the echo of something older than the Jedi, deeper than the Sith. And in dreams, those echoes speak. To Rey, standing on the cliffs of Ajan Klos, the Force came in images, flashes of people she loved, of places she'd never been, of shadows reaching out and light pushing back. To Luke, alone on Ahch-To, it came as regret, as vision, as memory reshaped into teaching. He saw the Jedi at their height and their fall, saw what was and what could be, not as prophecy, but as path. Visions are not commandments, the old Jedi texts once warned, but invitations. They show a possibility, not a fate. And in this softness, in this open-endedness, the Force remains alive not just in sabers or skill, but in imagination. In the moments where a mind relaxes, a spirit opens, and something ancient and gentle drifts in. Ahsoka Tano, traveling between worlds, has touched the veil between moments. Ezra Bridger, long gone and not forgotten, felt time bend and stretch, as if the Force itself was a tapestry, with hands reaching through it to weave kindness across galaxies. These are not stories of war. They are stories of wonder. And that wonder has not ended. Long after the Republic, after the Rebellion, after the Resistance, there will be people lying quietly on the decks of drifting ships, eyes closed, feeling the pull of something they cannot name. There will be monks on moons that have no name, meditating not for power, but for peace, reaching into the quiet with nothing but breath and belief. And sometimes, just sometimes, they will see. They will see a vision of a figure in white robes, smiling with kindness, or hear the soft voice of a long-gone master whispering a question rather than a command, or feel the spark of something that says, "You are not alone." Because in the end, the Force is not a power to be used. It is a friend to be felt, a presence to be joined, a whisper of memory and mystery and motion, waiting patiently for anyone who closes their eyes and listens. And so, even as planets rise and fall, as empires collapse and new worlds grow, the dream space of the Force remains. A galaxy within the galaxy, a gentle place, not of answers, but of questions, of learning, of letting go. It is there for the wounded, for the curious, for the quiet, for the listener who, lying still beneath a sky of stars, wonders what comes after story. And the answer always is more story, not told loudly, but dreamed, gently, with wonder. The Force, in its deepest truth, does not end with the last of the Jedi, nor is it ever truly bound by the rules that the old orders once tried to write in stone. It is motion, intuition, breath, and balance, ever shifting like starlight across water. And in the quiet places of the stars are quiet now. The battlefields have stilled. No more lightsabers clash. No more masks hide pain. The man we follow, the child, born beneath twin suns, the warrior who fell into shadow, the father who rose once more, is gone. And yet, he is everywhere. The Force breathes in silence now, just as it did long ago, when a boy once looked to the sky and dreamed of something more. Anakin Skywalker, the chosen one, sleeps, but not in darkness. He sleeps in light. You've journeyed across time tonight, from the sands of Tatooine to the throne room of Palpatine, from pod races and starships to lava rivers and final goodbyes. You've walked with the boy, felt with the warrior, wept with the father. You've seen how a prophecy twisted in fear was untangled by love. Because in the end, it wasn't strength that saved the galaxy. It wasn't prophecy. Not Jedi teachings, not Sith power, not destiny carved in stone. It was a moment of love, of a father saving his son. That was how the dark was undone. And now, in the quiet beyond the galaxy, where blue light hums softly in the stars, he watches. Anakin's spirit, unburdened and free, lingers in warmth. Not trapped, not haunted, not hidden behind machines or masks. He is peace. He is the quiet smile on Endor as his son burns his armor, not in hate, but in honor. He is the unseen hand in every quiet moment Leia looks to the stars. He is the echo in Luke's dream. He is the stillness between heartbeats in the Force. You may not see him, but you feel him, just as his children do, because he is not gone. He is redeemed, returned, restored. The man, not the mask. The father, not the fear. And though his story was written in tragedy, it ended in love. Close your eyes now. Let the hum of the galaxy soften. Let the tale drift gently away, like stardust over quiet skies. Let go. Inhale. Exhale. You are safe now, just as Anakin is safe. He walks no more battlefields, no more choices, no more ghosts to chase. He has become one with the Force, not as a weapon, but as light. Tonight, we leave the story behind, not because it's forgotten, but because, for now, it rests. And so do you. You have listened deeply, traveled far, felt it all. And just as the chosen one found his peace, you are finding yours. Let your breath slow. Let your thoughts fall gently, one by one, like stars in orbit. Let the silence speak. You are not alone in this galaxy. You never were. And neither was he. He was a brother, a friend, a husband, a father, a soul caught in a storm. But in the end, he came home. To the light, to his children, to himself. He sleeps now, not in the cold, but wrapped in warmth, wrapped in memory, wrapped in love. No more battles, no more fear, just the Force, just peace, just rest. And so, dreamer, if he could find it, after all the sorrow, the fire, the fury, then maybe, just maybe, you can too. Sleep now beneath the stars. The chosen one sleeps, and the galaxy is quiet. Good night.